Welcome to our annual financial trend monitoring meeting. I say this every year, in my opinion, this is probably one of the most important meetings next to town meeting that we participate in. Tonight we have the K-8 school committee, the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and Matthew Wells, who is our new business manager. We've got appropriations, board of selectmen, and the financial planning committee over here on the left, and we've got some staff from the financial team up on the front here. This meeting is timed very perfectly, and we can't do this any sooner. I've had folks ask me, can we do this? Can we get a leg up on the next fiscal year's budget a little bit sooner? The reality is this is the perfect time for us to be talking about setting the table for the next fiscal year. And the reason is we've closed out fiscal 17. In November, the Board of Selectmen, through their tax classification hearing, set the final budget for fiscal 18. And those two data points are the basis upon which we're able now to do our financial trend monitoring and our projections. So the other piece of it is usually in the first week in December is when the state legislature has their revenue consensus hearing. So it's our first sort of glimpse into what maybe we can anticipate for state aid. So in terms of the agenda this evening, we're going to review the financial indicators for any significant change. This is sort of our backwards look in terms of historically our data. We're also going to look forward 5 years in terms of financial projections, including where we see ourselves right now as we prepare for fiscal 19. As part of this review, we will, of course, talk about what the projected tax impacts are, because we want to make sure we maintain an affordable community for our residents. And then the real point of this meeting and the real magic in what we do is the fact that we have all the policy boards and the financial boards and committees in one room at one time getting the same information. And so it's the information and the process that allows us to move forward to town meeting with one voice. And I don't want to jinx us, but as we circle through for fiscal 19, we've had 9 consecutive years where we as a collective group have gone to town meeting with unanimous support of every member of every board and committee for every budget and every capital project. And I don't know too many communities that can say that. And that happens because we all work well together, and we have, I hope you'll feel you have excellent information upon which to base your policy decisions on. In terms of the presentation, I gave you, you know how I usually am. I don't like to hand out the presentation because people flip ahead, because that's what I do. But I gave you the full presentation this time, and the reason why I did that is I'm not going to go through the full presentation. We're going to skip through. This is the 4th year that we've done this. There's a couple new faces, but most of you have heard this spiel several times. And we have a lot of financial indicators that we review that haven't changed, that continue to be favorable, and I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on them. So we're going to focus on a couple things that are in motion, and then we're going to talk about financial projections. So if you're interested in the background of what financial trend monitoring is, aspects of it, how we use it, all that is in the presentation. You've all seen it many times. So I'm fast forwarding to what I call our dashboard. This is the snapshot summary of the 14 indicators, financial indicators that we as a community track. Now, these are similar and very much the same types of indicators that a municipal bond rating agency would track. So you have revenue indicators, you have expenditure indicators, you have operating position indicators in terms of reserves, financial reserves. You have indicators telling you where you stand in terms of your unfunded liabilities for pensions and OPEB and things like that. And then last but not least, we have indicators that talk about where we stand in terms of our overall capital investment, our buildings, our equipment, and then specifically how we're doing in terms of our infrastructure with regard to pavement. And that's something we spent quite a bit of time talking about a couple years back. So as you can see, they're labeled green favorable, red's unfavorable, black is sort of marginal or potentially uncertain. These are the 3 I'd like to talk to you this evening about, because these, in my opinion, are the 3 that are going to have potentially the biggest impact on fiscal 19 budget as well as the projections when we get to that portion of the presentation. We're going to talk about state aid, economic development, economic growth revenues, and employee benefits, specifically health insurance. Health insurance in fiscal 19, just like it was in 18, is going to be extremely challenging. You've all heard me say, if health insurance is okay, we're okay. If health insurance is problematic, our budget is going to be problematic. So let's move forward and we'll start with state aid. I always begin with this graph. It's a 30-year history of state aid, and it shows these long black bars. These are recessionary periods, and this is the one that we just climbed out of. Now you can see the difference. These are sharp V-shaped valleys, V-shaped valley. This one looks like more like a check mark. And the recovery, very slow and steady. The problem with slow and steady is if state aid for us is going up 1% a year or 1.5% a year, and you all know we need a 3.5% increase in our budget to maintain services and to take care of the things that we need to do, well, what does that mean? It means there's a shift over time from state aid onto local taxes. This chart is in nominal dollars, so it's not adjusted for inflation, and I think everybody knows the difference between 5.2 or $5.3 million in fiscal 17 versus that same amount back in fiscal 03. People don't realize we are just now in nominal dollars getting back to where we were in state aid from fiscal 2003. Adjust for inflation and you get even an uglier picture. This is our indicator number 4, and it's state aid as a percentage of the operating revenues. And this is adjusted for inflation, and you can see very clearly from left to right, you've got a steady downward trend. So if you go back to fiscal 03, the last high point that I just talked about, state aid was 13.1% of our operating budget in terms of revenues. In fiscal 18, the fiscal year that just began July 1 of 17, it's 8.5%. Okay, 13% to 8.5%. Where do you think that difference has gone? It's gone on the taxes. When you look at our budget, we are 80% local property tax, personal property tax. Used to be 10, I used to say 10% state aid. It's about 8 or 9% state aid. 5% motor vehicle excise, and the rest is parking tickets, speeding tickets, Board of Selectmen licenses and things of that nature. So the bulk is taxes. The next biggest piece to it, the puzzle, is state aid. And state aid is, as a percentage, slowly declining. And that has been the case throughout the recession. That check mark, that slow gain back that we just talked about, it just is dwindling and dwindling down. And it's a slow shift and shaft onto the local taxes. So that's the story. So what's happening in fiscal 19? If you're reading the papers, right, you know that the revenues are going stronger, the economy is improving, the state budget is looking up. In your handouts is an article from the State House News, and it details a meeting that takes place every year, first week in December, between the Senate House Ways Means Committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, and the administration, the governor's administration. So that meeting just took place on December 6th. And the point of that is they bring in people, and the article that I provided to you tells you the Department of Revenue comes in and they say what they think the increase is going to be. Mass taxpayers come in, they say. Economists from Northeastern come in. There's several groups that come in, and basically the point of the meeting is the legislature and the administration takes all that information in, and they have to decide as a group what are they going to base their fiscal 19 budget on in terms of the assumption, kind of like what we talk about here tonight about our assumptions about our revenues. These are their assumptions about their revenues. And so as you can imagine, depending on if you're hawkish or bullish, they range from 2.8%, which is the mass taxpayers, which tends to be very conservative, up to 6.1%, which was the professor from Northeastern. And then DOR came in somewhere between 3 and 4%. So here's something interesting. The last 2 years, during an improving economy and improving revenues at the state level, the state has overestimated their revenues for the last 2 fiscal years, okay? So what does that mean? Well, it means in the middle of the year, they're making cuts. Now, they've spared local aid during these last 2 years, the direct local aid. However, we've been hit a lot of off-budget things. A lot of grant programs and things like that have been cut, nipped and tucked, and so we felt that pinch in several different areas, even though they didn't go after our direct state aid. But that's concerning because, and to some extent, you know, you're looking at possibly a 3rd year of overestimating or being too enthusiastic. The town of Northborough, over those years, we have budgeted, regardless of what the state revenue consensus hearing and what the state says is going to happen, we've budgeted 1 to 1.5% over the last several years for state aid. And if you remember that checkmark chart that I just showed you, we've been pretty much right on target. We might get another $25,000 at the end of the day. And on a $60 million budget, yeah, it's not really making much of a difference. But we've been pretty much right on target. And I send you all updates as the budget progresses through the House and the Senate and the conference committee, and then the governor signs it. I give continuous updates. And it's never more than $25,000 or $30,000 difference from what we budgeted. And the thing to keep in mind is state aid is not a mathematical exercise, okay? It's not like you're looking at motor vehicle and you're doing rolling averages or linear regression analysis and you're trying to figure out from a mathematical standpoint how best to forecast. State aid is a political process. Their revenues can go up 5% and we might only still see a 1% increase in our state aid because they're going to fund the programs that they need to fund first. They're going to fund their rainy day fund, their reserve account first, and we seem to get what's left over. Now, you're going to hear things from the governor's office about how they're going to give us a comparable increase. Whatever state aid increases are unreserved, undesignated local aid. What's it called? UGG?
Unrestricted general government.
Unrestricted general government aid, okay? We refer to it as UGG because we go, UGG, not again. You know, anybody know what that is? Anybody want to guess what that is that they're willing to give us 100% on? Lottery. Very good, Patty. That's the lottery money that is, by legislation, only supposed to go to us, that they started peeling off years ago when the budget got bad. That's our money. The lottery was sold to the taxpayers because it was going to fund schools, it was going to fund police, and it was going to fund fire, okay? Well, so they're willing to match on that. That's awful big of them, okay? That is a very small fraction of our state aid. Where does most of our state aid come in the form of? My friends over here, anybody want to guess? Our business manager want to guess? Chapter 70, right? School aid. So yes, you're going to hear about how they're going to give us a matching increase in state aid, but it's going to be a very small percentage of our state aid. And it's not going to help us a whole lot. We are conservative in our state aid estimates. And I'm fond of saying here, if we forecast 1 or 1.5 and we get 1.6 or 1.7, well, what do we do with that money? It doesn't go to free cash. We don't hold a special town meeting to spend the extra 25 grand. The only place it can be used at that point is in November when the Board of Selectmen sets the tax rate with the Department of Revenue. It helps to suppress the tax impact. That's the only place it can go. So if anybody gets concerned that we, again, in fiscal 19, our forecasts and our budget is predicated on a 1% increase in state aid. Here's the other part of the story, folks. Our aid, our state aid, our cherry sheet money might go up 1.5% or 2%, but until at the end of the process, the end of the budget process, we find out what the assessments are, particularly charter school assessments. So the state gives us money, and then they charge us money back. Things like mosquito, for mosquito control, for charter schools and things like that. I always talk about it's the net impact of what they give us and what they take away. How much more did we get net from last year? And when you do all that, we've been hovering around 1%, 1.5%, 4 years now. Throughout the recessionary, the recovery through the recessionary period, after the recessionary period, that's what we've been doing. So when people say, hey, you know, where's all the revenue? How come things aren't picking up? The economy's doing better. Yes, it is, but we're not getting a fair partnership, I would argue, with the state. So that's the situation with state aid. That's why our budget is predicated right now on a 1% increase. That might go to a 1.5 or a 2% increase, but again, it's not going to have a material impact on our budget. So let's talk about economic development growth revenues. This is a second indicator of the three that I'd like to get into some detail on tonight. So economic growth revenues, these are elastic revenues, things that flex and move with the general economy, okay? They're a very good indicator because if they start to contract, if all of a sudden people aren't building and they're not buying cars and they're not pulling building permits, that's using a leading indicator that the economy is contracting or your local economy might be contracting for some reason. So we look at these things, and you can see here, it's a slight decline, from a high. Anybody want to guess why 2012 and 2013 is so high? Very good. You guys know the drill. Avalon Bay, 382 units of new housing, and Northborough Crossing. I'll split that between Billy and Jeff. I'll each give you a point for correct answers. And so what pushed those numbers up? Those are $500,000 building permits because those are very big projects. But now you're kind of sliding back here, and things they look relatively stable, right? If you had to characterize this, would you characterize that as a negative trend? No, not really. It's kind of, you've got an anomaly here where you've got a couple big projects and then things slide back. Well, there's a couple things going on in here. Our building permits in 17 are the lowest they've been since 2009. And building permits are a leading indicator of what we're seeing for economic development and new growth, okay? But this isn't going down. And the reason why that's not going down is it's being propped up and backfilled by two sources. One, motor vehicle excise. People are buying new cars because they're feeling good. The economy is basically doing all right, and people are buying new cars. And the other is Patty's favorite subject, our meals tax. We made a surcharge. We adopted the legislation to put a surcharge on meals, okay? So we haven't had a lot of economic development. I'm talking brick and mortar building in this community lately, right? After the mall went in. But we did get a second phase to the mall. What went in there? Restaurants. Restaurants. You guys had the collective foresight. Billy, that's 2 points for you if anybody's keeping score. Jeff, you got 1, you got 2. Collectively as a group, we talked about the need to find new revenues. We talked about a need to find a funding source to deal with some of our unfunded liabilities. And we identified the meals tax because we knew we were going to be growing our restaurant businesses in town. And this was a great source for us. Thank goodness we did, because look at this. We've stayed nice and level. We've backfilled that. That was a smart policy decision and one that continues to pay off for our community. So where's the problem then? I just told you that economic development in terms of building permits, the brick and mortar stuff, is slowing down, okay? This is a chart right out of our tax classification hearing from when we set the tax rate in November. This yellow mustard right here, that's Avalon Bay, that's residential. This lighter colored yellow, that's the mall, Northborough Crossing. This big chunk right here, that's the second phase of the mall coming in here. But look at this. Now, you don't expect to be here. These 3 years, we're never probably going to see that again unless we get a massive development out on the Coderre's property out on Bartlett Street. Some big biotech firm or something comes in. You're not going to see that. So if you just forget those 3 bars and you see this, you're still looking at, this is 31 million, this is 33.5 million fiscal 18 for new growth. That's 15-year low for us. Not sounding the alarms. It's something for us to be cognizant of and to watch. It's certainly something that impacts our fiscal 19 budget and will continue to impact our budgets in the foreseeable future unless we start seeing more economic development. I know everybody thinks, well, geez, we just got that second phase of the mall. So how much was the second, where's Dan? Dan, what was the second phase of the mall worth in total?
For this year?
In total, the last 2 years or this year?
So it's gone up because it's phased in, so it was like 6 million or something.
6 million. These numbers are 80, that's 92 million. The mall is worth 6 million. Almost all of our economic, half these numbers here is that phase. And that's not going to repeat itself. And what we look at the leading indicator, which is building permits. We don't see things coming in the pipeline. Now, are we in trouble? No. Okay, we have the raw materials, as I always say, for economic development. We have land, 100 acres contiguous for industrial zone on Bartlett with Gutierrez. We got 50-acre parcel right next to the mall, Kimball Sand and Gravel. They're going to wrap up. That can be developed. We have places, not a lot, but we do have significant areas that can be developed. And we have what you cannot manufacture or fake, location. We are one of the most desirable places for economic development. But we just went through this big expanse here in the second phase of the mall. And they build these buildings on spec, okay? Which means they're speculating that if I build it, they will come. Somebody will lease it. Well, as these buildings are built now, and there's 2 up there that still haven't been leased, Dan? Up. There's still a couple spaces up in that second phase of the mall that haven't been leased yet. So people aren't going to come in and build more spec until we've absorbed what we've already built. So as we look out next year and the year after, we don't see a lot of development, economic development. So we're estimating right now for fiscal 19, we're estimating 30 million, which is this bar right here, in new growth. And that might be, if anything, a little optimistic. But we're not being overly conservative. You're not going to see anything like this, guys. That's not bad news. We tend to be conservative on our new growth estimates. We tend to estimate and plan for about $30 million in new growth. So again, we're fine. It's sort of baked into our process. But that's the story on new growth. It's something that we would want to talk about in the future. If we don't see things turn around, we don't get that economic development, one of the things as a policy group that the selectmen might want to do is start talking about what else can we do or should we be doing to incentivize development. Or if a significant development comes to town and they're looking for a tax increment financing agreement, a TIF agreement, and some incentives, we might want to be open to that because we want to spur that next round of economic development. So that's new growth. So that's 2 of the 3 indicators. The last one I want to talk about tonight, by the way, if anybody wants to talk about any of these other ones, I'm happy to come back. I want to talk about employee benefits and personnel costs. So we have 2 indicators that we watch for this. The first is this one here, which is overall personnel as a percentage of your budget. So this is salary, the blue is salary, the red is employee benefits, and the green is retirement assessments. Our employee costs, our personnel costs are steady. They stay almost level, if you look here, at about 75% of our overall budget. There's nothing wild happening there. We aren't spending a lot more on personnel relative to our expenses. It's pretty consistent and pretty steady. Where we are seeing some upward trend and a little bit of an upward tick is when you look at this. This is a breakdown of employee benefits. So the blue here, again, employee benefits. The red is retirement assessment, and the green up here is the OPEB money that we're putting in the OPEB trust fund to deal with our unfunded liability. And so as you look at this here, you see this kind of going down. This was us controlling very effectively our health insurance costs over about an 8-year period. Now we're starting to see this tick back up. I don't consider the little green caps on here. I'm not concerned about those because that's where we're putting money aside for our unfunded liability, our OPEB. That's a good thing. That's not we're just spending more on these things. We're starting to take care of our unfunded liability. So that's fine. But if you ignore the green and you just look at the red, you see everything, it's just starting to tick up. So here's the thing about employee benefits. We look at trend monitoring, right? And we want to see, is it trending positively or is it trending negatively? Is it a warning? Do we need to do something? That's what the point of this exercise is. Well, that does not hold true when it comes to health insurance, because health insurance trending up or down is important to watch. We've been pretty good about managing it, but health insurance in any single year can put us into fiscal distress because it's such a big budgetary item. So let's talk about that. This chart our table on the right-hand side is directly out of the budget message. Those of you that have been to town meeting have seen this displayed year upon year. What it shows is 2007, 8, and 9, these were the increases that we saw for health insurance, on average over 10%. Then beginning in fiscal 10, you look at these increases, very manageable. On average, for 8 years, a little over 2.5%. Now this is a budgetary increase. That's as good as it gets. How do we do that? In fiscal 10, we negotiated plan design changes with all employee unions. We adopted Section 18, moved our retirees off our active plans and onto Medicare. In fiscal 12, the teachers increased their contribution. They went from 80 to 75%. That helped us out in fiscal 12 for the budget. Then we stayed pretty steady for a couple years. In fiscal 17, the budget was notching up again. We negotiated plan design changes with all the employees again. Last year in fiscal 18 was the worst year. I've been the manager here almost 10 years. I've been here for all of this. Last year was the worst year I've ever seen. And the reason why it was the worst year is because the increase was 12 to 15%. And that information and that increase came to us at the 11th hour of our budget process, which blows everything out of the water. Now, to their credit, every bargaining unit came to the table in good faith, as they have for the last 8 or 9 years. And we said, here's our problem. What do we do? Well, they agreed to some plan design changes, and we saw the single largest budget increase in 8 or 9 years, 8.33%. That was pretty ugly. This year, we're being told by our consultant, our health insurance consultant, that we're looking at least a 10% increase. And the reason for that is several factors. Number one, the market itself is moving at 8 to 10%. So things we don't control, what's happening at the federal level, whether or not these carriers are making money or losing money, these are all things that impact us. The things that are local to us that are killing us right now, our claims are running at 98 or in excess of 100%. And basically that means we're paying them a premium and they're paying out more in claims than we're paying them in premium. I think everybody understands that's going to result in a significant increase the next year. It's a human condition, it's the luck of the draw. A couple large claims can do that to you, but we seem to have a number of them. It just happened. So we have that. The other thing that we're feeling is in the last 12 to 18 months, we've picked up 18 new subscribers, new people on our health insurance. Some of these are new employees. We've hired some police and fire. We've had some hirings in the school. Some of them are people who have moved from their spouse's private sector insurance onto ours. It's a number of factors. The result, though, is that we're looking at, right now, we're staring at a 10% increase for health insurance. Now, why do we get so excited about this? And I mean excited, but not in a happy, excited way, in a negative way. A 10% increase, our health insurance budget, and by the way, everybody understands that our health insurance budget is for the general government employees and the Northborough K-8 employees, okay? It does not include the high school. So all that budget is contained in the general government, the town side of the budget. And it's about a $5.5 million account. So a 10% increase is a $550,000 increase in just that line item, okay? Right now for fiscal 19, you're getting a little glimpse of a few slides down. We start to talk about projections. We're looking at about a 3.5, a 3.5, 3.6% increase overall for K-8 budget, the town budget, and the high school budget. Well, on the town side of the budget, a 3.5% increase is about $750,000. I realize everybody in this room has already read down to the next line, okay? That's 73% of all new revenues that we have to work with in fiscal 19. That does not leave money for wage increases. It does not leave money for increased retirement assessments. We have tried to make marginal increases on staffing where we've all agreed that we need to, most recently police and fire. We have other needs, as well. But it basically swamps everything. And I'll go back to what I said earlier, guys. If health insurance is okay, we're okay. If health insurance is out of control or problematic, our budget is going to be out of control and problematic. It's that simple. It doesn't matter what the trend is for the last 5 years or 3 years or 10 years. Health insurance is so critical to us that any given year can throw us into fiscal distress. And that's where we are for fiscal 19. So what's being done? I wouldn't lay out that dire prediction if we didn't have at least a glimpse of how we might get ourselves out of this. On November 28th, we had a meeting with the Insurance Advisory Committee. The Insurance Advisory Committee is made up of all bargaining units on the town, the teachers, all of the non-teaching staff that's unionized, police, fire, non-public safety folks on our side. We all got in a room together and we went through all this information in a little more detail than we're doing here tonight in terms of claims and so forth. And we laid out a couple of options. Nobody wants to look at plan design changes. And by the way, does everybody know what I mean when I talk about plan design changes? Increasing co-pays, deductibles, adding in costs for things that we didn't pay for before, like MRIs and things like that. We've been doing that for years to help manage these costs. There's not a lot of appetite to do that if there's another alternative. And the alternative that we came up with as a group and the Insurance Advisory Committee unanimously agreed to pursue is to issue a request for proposals to consolidate to one carrier. So right now we have Tufts, we have Harvard Pilgrim, we have Fallon. All of our membership is spread out over those 3 carriers. It's fractured. In some instances, we don't have enough members in any one of those groups to get experience rated. In other words, we get whatever the default market increase is because we have enough people there to make our claims data relevant from a statistical standpoint. So we're going to consolidate to one carrier. We believe if we go out into the market right now, and by the way, the structure we have now with multiple carriers, that's a throwback to when, hey, if somebody wanted to offer health insurance, it wasn't a big deal, it was a minor budgetary issue, you let somebody else in, you think, you give them more choice, it's a good thing. Problem now is more choice is fragmenting our buying power, and we need to consolidate that back in. I've been a proponent, I think some of you have heard me say over the years, I like having 3 carriers. We pit them against each other. Hey, Harvard Pilgrim's going up 10%, but Fallon's only going up 3%. Everybody's going to move to Fallon because it's cheaper if that's the case. And we've been able to do that. We've been successful in the past when you look back at that chart. There are market conditions and things that are happening that just swamp that now. We're not seeing that value. It's not materializing in any cost savings. They don't care what the other carriers are doing. It's just the new market. It's the new norm. So we're going to go out for an RFP. The thing to keep in mind is we don't have the authority. We collectively, the policy-making boards and committees, we don't have the authority to change or consolidate carriers. And we don't have the authority to change, except at the bargaining table, contribution rates. What we do have the authority to change if we invoke the legislation is plan design. We can force plan design changes. There's a process for that. You have to share some of the savings with the employees. It's a long, drawn-out process. We've never gone down that road. We've never needed to go down that road because the employees have always come to the table in good faith and worked with the town to do what's right for the organization as a whole. I don't see that changing this year. But if we don't get good bids in, and we can't get that increase down below 5%, or we can't get everybody to agree to implement it, we're going to have a different conversation. It'll impact the school budget, it'll impact our budget, it'll impact the organization as a whole. I'm not going to go down that path because I can tell you, again, we've had 10 years of being able to successfully get this done. Right now, the IAC unanimously is in agreement that this is the avenue we should appeal. And let me just be clear why this is. If we consolidate to one carrier, we'll leave plan design where it is. They'll save money. We'll save money. The taxpayer saves money. It's a win all around. It's a very positive outcome for everybody. I won't say it's a no-brainer because it will be disruptive, particularly if we go to a new vendor altogether. But here's the thing. It doesn't really matter what's in your pocket if it sounds like a bad credit card commercial. What's in your pocket? Is it a Tufts card? Is it a Harvard Pilgrim? The reality is it's 100% network coverage. The PCPs are all the same. The idea when it used to be the networks were different, and that was, if your doctor was in that network, that's the network you wanted to be in. They all have the same network now. It's virtually 100% coverage. So it shouldn't matter to an employee if they have a Harvard Pilgrim or a Tufts card or a Blue Cross Blue Shield card. And so that's the process that we need to go through with the employees, and that's what we're working on. So that's the issue with health insurance. So you've heard me talk about state aid, economic development revenues, and health insurance. In my opinion, those are the three things that are in motion impacting our fiscal 19 budget. At this point, we have a plan for how we're going to manage these three moving pieces, and overall, everything else is pretty good, guys. Oh, one quick indicator I do want to touch upon. This is our OPEB, our other post-employment benefits. This is a success story for us to some degree. If you focus on this yellow line, pay no attention to the growing unfunded liability up here. It's going to continue to grow. What I want you to look at is this yellow line. This is our funding ratio, which has always been 0. We have never had any funding put aside for our OPEB. We're not blazing any trails, but we're at 4.4% funded right now because we put $500,000 aside each year. And so you see it starting to come in here. So here's your unfunded liability. This is what you have in the trust fund. That's net, and that's what it is as a percentage. Okay? The good news is, if you look down here, as of October of this year, we have $2.3 million in our trust fund. Okay? That's real money, and we're making progress. One of the things that we're going to need to talk about, and we will each year, it's not enough money. We would literally be putting in 3 times that, okay, to start making a real dent in our unfunded liability. But at a minimum for fiscal 19, we need to maintain the $500,000. If we can somehow increase it, that would be great. We're going to look back at this again, and in the next couple of years, we're going to have to, we keep saying when things get better, when state aid returns, when economic development comes back, we need to find some more revenues and start putting more money towards our OPEB. But we're still in decent shape. We're better than the vast majority of communities out there that haven't put anything meaningful aside. I told you I'd move quick. So in terms of the fiscal indicators, what you take away from this is right now we're in relatively good financial shape. We talked about the new growth, but the bottom line, and we got into great detail during the tax classification hearing in November, about the diversification and the strength of our tax base. We don't have all our eggs in any single basket. We've got a very diverse commercial industrial tax base. That's great for us. Our financial reserves, our policy says between 5 and 10%. We like to keep them around 8% or so. Right now, we're right on target. The plan for fiscal 19 is to put another $200,000 from free cash into the reserves to maintain that. If you don't, what happens is your budget goes up, and as a relative percent, your reserves will go down. So you have to keep committing and investing in your financial reserves to maintain that ratio, which is what the bond rating companies want to see you at. Debt, we didn't talk about debt, but debt is very manageable, around 5% right now, and our policy is 5 to 10%. We don't, as you know, issue debt really for anything other than large projects like the Lincoln Street building project. We haven't issued debt for things like equipment, vehicles, things of that nature. Again, one of the indicators, but we didn't spend time on it tonight, but you all know this, is our one-time revenues. We have limited one-time revenues to $500,000 in the operating budget. The fiscal 19 budget keeps it at that level as well. We anticipate again, although we have a little less free cash, we do anticipate making probably about $1.5 million in investments in our capital on a pay-as-you-go basis in fiscal 19 as well. It's a little less than we've done in the last couple of years, but it continues with that trend. In terms of issues, we've talked about the key ones. OPEB, we need to keep investing in OPEB. Pension liability, I didn't get into that. The bottom line with pension liability is it's a significant unfunded liability. It's about $29.7 million right now. There's nothing more that anybody in this room needs to do. It is on a funding schedule to be fully funded in 2035. So there's a plan in place. Our assessments reflect that investment plan. Although it's unfavorable, on the dashboard, it is actually, it will improve, and there's nothing as a policy group for you to discuss because we're on track. Big issues, uncertainty surrounding state aid, uncertainty with regard to health insurance, and then just in general, economic development. We know we're going to get more economic development. I just can't tell you when. But I can tell you, as I look at the building permits, I don't see it in the pipeline in the next year. Okay? So fiscal 19 budget considerations, we're going to keep investing in OPEB, at least $500,000. Need to make sure that any decisions we make with regard to staffing and contracts, that they're sustainable. We know we've got low new growth, and state aid is going to lag our budget, at least for the next year. We will continue as part of our fiscal 19 budget to make investments in our infrastructure and continue to fund the pavement management plan, which is part of the base budget. So we're not increasing it, much like OPEB, but we're maintaining it to make sure that we're getting those investments in our roadways. And the most important thing here is that every decision that we make as a collective body with regard to our finances, that they're in compliance with our adopted comprehensive financial policies. There's nothing in the fiscal 19 budget that's going to be a one-time gimmick or punting things off to subsequent fiscal years. I always say this, what you see with our budget is real. The foundation is solid, and barring any budget surprise, cuts in state aid or natural disasters, we should be in pretty good shape. Okay, so that is the retro. That's looking backwards in terms of the financial trends of the things that are in play for fiscal 19. Does anybody have any questions about any of those things or any of the indicators that I moved over or didn't really get into much detail on? Everybody's good? Bill?
John, if the insurance claims go down, does that in turn make our rates go down?
That's a great question. So the question is, if our loss ratios, if our claims go down, does that help us with our renewal? Yes, it helps us with our renewal. If you think about it this way, if you pay $100,000 in claims, $100,000 in premium, and you have $80,000 in claims, that's a good ratio. Anything in the low to mid 80s is really good. When you get over 90, when you get over 95, that's bad. So if our claims come down, that will help us. They move cyclically. We have years where our claims are really low, and then we have a couple really bad cases, and a $500,000 claim, it'll push it back up. So it moves cyclically. But if the claims get better, yes, it helps. But I can tell you that we had years where our loss ratios were in the mid 80s, which is pretty good. Usually argue for a very low increase when they're that good. And the carriers came and said, that's fine, your claims are fine, but we lost $20 million, so we need to make that money up, so we need to charge you more. So that's very frustrating for us because a lot of what drives the rate increases, we have no control over, and we have no influence over either. And there's a difference. There are things that you control and things that you can nudge, right? Plan design is influence. Claims data is influence. But if the market is going haywire because something is happening at the federal level, we get swept up in that. And to some extent, I think it's an excuse just to raise the premiums. But it is what it is. Patty?
I'd like to continue with Bill's line of questioning about the health insurance and in regards to the Insurance Advisory Committee. What other, I know they recommended to do carrier consolidation, but were there other suggestions thrown out that they said absolutely not to, say a 60-day waiting period for new employees? Or
there's a lot of things, people come up with stuff like that it's not allowable under Chapter 32B. There are a lot of things that we can't do that the private sector does. How we provide these benefits is laid out in Chapter 32B, okay? So that's one thing. In terms of what we talked about, the only options that we have to deal with to try to mitigate health insurance increases are plan design changes and carrier consolidation. That's really all there is. And just so you know, the Group Insurance Commission, this is all of the state employees, and how many, June, do we know how many municipalities are in the GIC now? Is it 50?
several now, yeah.
I wanted to say 50, but don't hold me to that. But communities have joined the GIC, but they provide insurance for all the state employees.
They have a 60-day.
They follow different rules, but they have a very different plan design change. And they actually just issued an RFP for carrier consolidation because they can't get any more cost savings out of plan design changes without pushing things even further to be detrimental to the employees. So plan design changes and carrier consolidation, that's what we have to work with. And they chose the carrier consolidation, which again, if you can achieve that savings while maintaining the benefits to the employees, again, that's a win for everybody. And I think that's why we've focused on that. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, if we feel that the insurance company that we end up with is kind of raking us over the coals in terms of loss ratio, how often can we go out to bid?
That's a great question. So one of the concerns when you do carrier consolidation is we know we're going to get a very, very competitive renewal in year one. We're going to get more of a market renewal in year two. By the way, you cannot bid out, just so everybody understands, you cannot bid out the 3 carriers that we have. Nobody will bid on that. That's a dead model. Nobody will bid. So it's not like we can take what we have now and go out to bid. So you have to get consolidation. But much like we do with things like, I hate to use it as an analogy, but like trash, okay? You go out to bid every 3 years, or you negotiate. If you can't negotiate a good renewal, then you go out to bid and see what the market is. The issue with health insurance is you can't go out to the market and bid it every year, because when they come in, they want to have some sense that you're going to stay for at least a couple of years. Now, legally, we cannot bid it out for more than a 1-year contract. We can't do a 3-year contract like we do with busing or trash. We can only do a 1 year. That's it, by law. So you bid it out, then you sit tight for a couple of years, and the leverage that you have is, hey, give me a fair renewal or I'm going to go out to bid. And you probably don't want to go out to bid more than on a 3-year cycle unless there's some compelling reason. But at least then, so how you manage from there, what are you going to do to manage your health insurance? Well, you're going to go out to bid every 2 or 3 years. There's really not a lot of moves here, guys. There's not a lot of, if there's some other magic answer to this, please let me know. But again, we're trying to meet everything. We're trying to be budget sensitive. We're trying to be sensitive to the taxpayers. And we also want to make sure that we have quality benefits that are going to allow us to recruit and retain quality people. And it's tempting sometimes to compare what's happening with our health insurance to maybe what a private sector group is doing. But really what matters for us is comparing what we're doing to who we're competing with. A teacher isn't going to go to a high-tech company. They're going to go to another school system. A police officer is going to go to another town to be a police officer. They're not going to go someplace else. So that's the comparison that we're going to do. And that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at this year is looking at those comparables. But there's not a lot you can do. Carrier consolidation, plan design. If you look at the GIC, how have they managed their costs over this same time period? It's no magic. It's plan design changes, increasing copays, increasing deductibles, and now they're going to carrier consolidation. Okay. Any other questions on the indicators before we shift to now forward-looking for kind of what we're seeing? Yes, Jason.
I'll just ask a question. Certainly in the private sector, we have had a shift toward HighDeductible Plans, for instance, and health savings accounts. I'm not suggesting that's the way we should go. I'm not suggesting anyone would be very enthusiastic about that. But I'm just curious whether or not that is a type of plan that comes up for consideration or evaluation compared to the traditional plan.
We've actually had discussions with our health insurance consultant about high deductible plans. I think it's an option that is starting to make its way into the municipal realm and the municipal market. The step, really the next step that we have to have in order to go out to bid and to look at stuff like that is to get things simplified and consolidated. Right now, it's impossible to do this when you've got 3 carriers, multiple plans, all different contribution rates. One of the things that makes it difficult to do plan design changes with our current structure right now is it impacts everybody differently. And you have to explain it almost on an individual basis. And then people are going to make the decision from how does it impact me. So we need to get this consolidated. And then look, down the line, I think I think a lot of things are going to have to be discussed. We're not quite there yet, but high deductible plans is the direction things, based on what our consultant is telling us, that's the direction that everything seems to be going. So the biggest issue with this is when it comes to health insurance, there's a tremendous information cost involved explaining this to people. It's very personal and it's very critical to each of us. And so it's a sensitive topic and it takes a lot. And the fact that we've been able to do this collaboratively with all of our unions without any lawsuits, without any grievances, and we've done it without any outside pressure. We've shown if there's an issue, we get together and we try to find a plan to resolve it. This year, I believe the answer to our issue is going to be consolidation. 5 years from now or somewhere down the line, if a high deductible plan is kind of where we might go, that may very well be. It's going to take a lot of explaining, and it's going to be a rationale for why we would do it and why we would be doing it at some particular point in time. It makes a lot of sense, but it's a lot to get somebody to understand. It's a very, very different approach to how we do things right now. Doesn't make it mean it's good or bad, but again, a lot to explain.
I just, from the perspective of having gone through that education experience with my own employer, so
Yes.
it is certainly something that's not very well understood and not something that makes a very good impression.
Yes.
I just was wondering if that's been discussed.
We've broached the topic. It hasn't had a real warm reception. And the fact that we have other options that maybe are a little bit less intimidating at the moment, I think you want to go with those first. Like everything that we do, we're moving in an incremental way, but we have to get consolidated. It's too fragmented and difficult to manage the way it is right now. Okay? So shifting gears now, it's looking backwards, 10 years trending, and now looking forward to where we see things going. So I want to talk a little bit now about 5-year projections, our assumptions. We'll talk about tax impact, and then just the big picture financial outlook. What are we seeing as we shake the snow globe? In terms of our methodology for these projections, we use a revenue-driven model, and we do that because unlike a number of communities that are up against the wall in terms of Prop 2.5, we have levy capacity because we've managed ourselves well. So we look at the levy ceiling in terms of Proposition 2.5. We use fiscal 18, which, as I said, as of November, is now the set budget as the base year and forecasting out. And frankly, I don't think you need me to tell you what's happening with Board of Selectmen alcohol licenses, which are stable, or fees for something. We look, it's state aid. It's taxes, state aid, and motor vehicles. That's roughly 95% of what we operate on. Those are the big things that we watch. Most of the other minor revenues, they tend to be pretty stable. The next big group would probably be building permits. And if you have a big project, you have big building permits, and if you don't, you don't. The goal of these assumptions and the methodology is we start from the premise of we want to maintain the quality of services that we have right now. That's what the taxpayers want us to do. Unless something compels us to cut those services, we're going to provide a budget that maintains and meets that. So in terms of our assumptions, we assume, as we talked about earlier, that we're going to see in fiscal 19, $30 million in new growth. That's new value, and that translates into about $522,000 in new tax revenues for the organization as a whole. $30 million in new growth, we already talked about. We do not see anything more than that, guys. That's what's in the pipeline. State aid, we talked about 1% increasing annually. One bright spot, and again, we talked about this in the economic development revenues. For fiscal 19, we're increasing motor vehicle excise by $194,000, $196,000, and our local meals taxes are up about $104,000. So we're looking at fiscal 9 for another local receipt-wise, another $300,000 is coming in. That's helping us, guys. That's a bright spot in our revenue picture. Everything else is basically level funded. And as I said before, there's no gimmicks, there's no one-time revenue gimmicks. We're continuing in accordance with all of our policies. We're also going to continue to invest in our OPEB at $500,000. We're budgeting right now. I'm assuming we're going to get consolidation on health insurance, and we're going to get that health insurance down to 5% increase or less. And that's what we're forecasting as we look out. That might be a little optimistic, you know, as I tell you what we just experienced in fiscal 18 and what we're looking at in 19. Our revenue assumptions are that we're assuming a 5% increase for the next 5 years. That might be optimistic. We'll see. And then key budgets. I say this every year. We need the superintendent, the school committee, the selectmen, myself, we need 3.5% to 4%, but at least 3.5% increase each year to maintain our services. If you start dipping below that, it means you're going to start making some choices about where you're going to constrain or reduce your services. So these forecasts are predicated that we're going to get what we need to maintain what we have. Obviously, if something goes off the rails, if there's some budget surprise, if the economy goes into another recession, we revisit all these assumptions. But as of today, this is what we're predicating these projections on. So this is a 5-year expense projection in fiscal 19 right here. So this is all of the schools, K-8, Algonquin, the high school, Assabet, and the town departments. In fiscal 19, this is a 3.6% increase right now based on what we see for revenues. Out here, fiscal 20, 21, 22, and 23 assumes a 4% budget increase, which again, might be a little optimistic. But we don't want to lose sight of, we need at least 3%. If you're somewhere between 3% and 4%, you can add programs, you can maybe add a little bit of staffing, you can take care of some things, maybe where you have a high service demand, and address those. You don't really need to see the numbers other than understand what's behind them, which is a 3.6% in fiscal 19 and then 4% in the out years. And the reason for that is we want to look at what that looks like in terms of our revenue projections. So we're assuming, again, we've already talked about what we're assuming for state aid, new growth, local receipts. If we assume 3.5% increase in 19 and a 4% budget increase across the board in out years, the number to focus on here is this yellow line. This is our unused levy capacity. Right now we have about $2.9 million in unused levy capacity. If state aid's growing at 1%, if new growth is not happening, most of our other revenues are fairly level funded, we would start digging into that levy capacity. And you see the number going down, down, down. And in fiscal 2023, this is an override, basically. Basically, this is where our break even is. Now, we show this way. Do I think that's exactly how it's going to play out? No, I don't. I don't think it's going to play out. I think the economy's going to improve. We're going to get a little more aid. I think we're going to get more economic development. And I think our revenues are going to continue to be stable. And if those things happen, then we won't dig into that levy capacity as much, and it'll extend. And if somewhere along in here we wind up with another $30 million project out on Guterres's property, a big biotech or something comes in, then we buy ourselves some more time. This is the situation with every community across Mass. If you're not bumped up in taxing at the max under the limits of Prop 2.5, you have a little bit of levy capacity cushion. And so you have something to dip into, and it's a safety valve for us. The faster you dip into it, the faster you use it, the faster you're up against the wall. So as I look at this, what would be one way to prolong that wall, hitting that wall? Well, revenues increase more state aid, economic development, or the budgets don't go up 4%, they go up 3.5% or something less. So again, based on these assumptions, this is what we're looking at. We have the ability to tweak these things a little bit, and on an annual basis, we look at where we are in terms of our revenues, what do we need in terms of budgets. But right now, the good news is we're unique in that we have levy capacity to dip into to, at a minimum, maintain that 3.5% and to maintain those services. A lot of towns that have taxed to the max when times were good They don't have that levy capacity, and so they're either cutting budgets, cutting services, or seeking overrides. Yes, Bill?
John, that's with a $30 million revenue increase each year, that flat line?
That's with a, yes, that assumes a minimum of $30 million in new growth each year. Of value. It's about $500,000 or $525,000 in new tax revenues.
John, you know she kept local receipts flat for that?
Yep. So it's conservative. It's conservative. Yep. I don't want to say this is worst case scenario, because I don't think this is worst case scenario. I think this is realistic. But it assumes that we're not going to get more growth in local receipts. Keep in mind now, we talk about local receipts. The big one is motor vehicle excise. There are years where motor vehicle excise went down by 6 figures, okay? It is not a straight linear. The first hint of a recession or something bad happening in the economy, what do you all do? You stop going out to eat and you keep driving that vehicle, right? Because those are things that you can punt off and you hang on to, right?
John, we did increase, in 19, we increased local receipts, Jeff, by $300,000.
Right.
So we kept level after that.
Right.
So the numbers you see are level funded, but they were increased $300,000.
So we talked about in 19 we increased, and then we've level funded after that. All right. So we've got, yes, Tony, you have a question?
The MSBA, that's the end of some reimbursement from the
Yes.
state.
Z-School.
That's the last reimbursement for Z-School. They used to do it back then. You bond it and they would pay, you'd pay an annual installment. Now they give it to you in a lump sum. The only thing that we bonded for the Lincoln Street School, or what we bonded for Lincoln Street School was what we actually needed. We got the state MSBA grant in one lump sum, came off the top. All right, so let's kind of move on and say if all these things take place, what does it look like in terms of the tax impact? So in fiscal 19, which we're preparing for right now, a 3.6% increase in the tax bill would result in about a $263 increase. You know how I say we need a 3.5% increase to maintain our level services? That translates into about a $250 or $260 tax bill increase. That's what we need. So, but as you look out here, you can see these numbers start to climb. 330, 418, 5% tax bill increases. These are things for you to be cognizant of, because what it means is we need to balance everything. When it comes to budgeting, it's all about 2 things: balance and sustainability. Balancing the impact on the taxpayers with the services, making sure that our departments have what they need to provide the services that we expect them to do, and then sustainability, that whatever we're asking of the tax base and the taxpayers, that it's reasonable and it's sustainable, that our revenue assumptions are reasonable and sustainable. If you start adding services and adding staff without looking at this in this context, then you won't see what's happening in these out years. That's why you do these projections. That's why you look backwards and you look forwards to make sure that when you make a decision to add staff, or you make a decision to settle a contract at some percentage increase in wages, that you understand the implications of that 3 and 5 years out. And that's something that we do very well as an organization. So I just wanted to talk about, so this is a historic and projected view of our tax bills. And you can see this is sort of business as usual before the recession. You can see those increases. This is coming out of the recession. You see those increases. And this flat, very relatively flat section right here, this is during the worst of the recession, 2010 through 2014, okay? A couple things happened in there. Single home values plummeted. At the same time, we had the 2 largest economic development projects in the town's history, Avalon Bay and Northborough Crossing. That could not have come at a better time for us. So single-family home values went down, but normally what happened is everything stayed level. You just have to increase the tax rate because you need the same amount of money. But we got all this economic development in. And you hear people say, boy, we had all that mall in. Why are my taxes going up? Where'd all that money go? and I keep repeating this, all that money went two places. One, your tax bills did not go up very much in here. And two, we didn't tax to the max, which means we have levy capacity, which we're able to use now so that we aren't cutting services or seeking overrides. That's where that money went. That's where it is, and that's where it went. Now, you start looking out here, single-family home values are now, we lost 13% during the recession. We gained all that back, and we're on the other side of it now. We know single-family home values in 19, as we look forward, based on Dan Brogy, the assessor's work, they're going up 3%. If you looked in one of our neighboring communities, they went up 5%. But the impact is the value of your house is going up, your tax bill is going to go up, particularly when the economic development isn't coming in, the commercial industrial isn't coming, okay? So this is just the trend. This is what's happening in the market. This is what everybody's experiencing. So we have the ability to control, to some degree, our budgets, right? To make sure that, because we don't want this to go like this, right? So we have some control over it. But that's why I told you in all of our assumptions, both for fiscal 19 and moving forward, is we're not asking for outrageous budget increases. We're asking and projecting 3.5% budget increases, 3.5% budget increases, because that's what the superintendent needs, and that's what I need to maintain the services that you all enjoy and you want to see going out there. That's just the reality. And if those numbers don't work for us, if those increases are too much, and on an annual basis we'll have that conversation, then we need to talk about where are we going to constrain, where are we going to cut back. Right now, for fiscal 19, assuming health insurance consolidation occurs, I don't think we need to have that conversation unless you do. I think this is a very reasonable budget increase, very reasonable tax impact, and excellent, excellent services for the money. Out here, these are just the projections. So that's based on, again, 4% increases, no new economic development, no new state aid. Do I think that that's what's going to actually occur? Well, I mean, look kind of where we've seen in the last 3-4 years. It might be a little shallower than that. Could be a little steeper depending on what happens, but that's why we do this. That's why we have this exercise. Nobody should be shocked next year that we're going to need a $250, $60 tax bill increase or a 3.5% budget increase. Bless you, that's where we are. So wrapping up now, in terms of the big picture financial outlook, budgets increase minimally to maintain taxes. We're both the schools and the general government are able to make minor adjustments. We've added, mid-year firefighters, mid-year police officers over the past couple of years. 1, not 4 at a time, not 3 at a time. But we've been able to make the changes in our budgets for the services that we need to do in a sustainable fashion. Unused levy capacity is on the table. If we need to dip into that to maintain a 3.5% budget increase, that we're assuming that we're going to do that. Taxes overall, based on the projections, are going to increase somewhere between 3.5% to 5%. That's a discussion we'll have on an annual basis based on whatever's happening at the state level and economic development. Again, for fiscal 19, I think we're in pretty good shape. Health insurance is okay, we're going to be okay. So we're in good shape right now. The last thing is I always have this caveat. It assumes that there's no budget surprises. A few years ago, I gave you guys a workshop, a work form to see how many budget surprises you could remember. And you guys came up with some great ones. It was mid-year cuts in state aid. We had hurricanes. We had crazy things going on with health insurance. All those things are still in play, guys. All that stuff could happen. We had recessions. We had, crazy things happen, So this assumes no major budget surprises. If we get a surprise, we come back, we talk about what the implications are and how we would manage that surprise. In conclusion here, we're going to continue funding our OPEB liability. We're going to implement health insurance modifications in 19 to control costs. We're going to, unless somebody says this is all bad information and you see the world in a different way than what I just presented, we're assuming that these indicators or projections are sort of the context in which we're looking at our fiscal future. And last but not least, we need to just every year come back and revisit these things. I try to scale this presentation back to focus on the things that are in motion, that matter to you as policy boards and committees. I'm not going to go through all the detail of all the indicators again unless you want me to, but this meeting is important. The difference between a successful organization and an unsuccessful one in the municipal world is, in my opinion, it comes down to information and process. If we agree on the information, and we have a process where everybody gets together and has a chance to voice their opinions, their concerns, and be heard, when we get to town meeting, and all you folks are up at that table at the head, and you're in unanimous support of these budgets and these initiatives that we want to do because you understand them, because you have the information to make an informed decision, your job, the reason you exist, is to make your recommendation to the voters who can't look at this information in this detail and don't have the time to do this. They're looking to you. When you speak with one voice and we're all on the same page, it's very powerful. And that's why we've had such great success in this town for almost a decade doing this. So I know that nobody wants to be out another night. You all are very busy folks. I greatly appreciate your indulging me to go through this information. And again, I know you folks appreciate this. You have more information and better information than 98% of the communities that are out there because of this process. With that, I'm going to conclude and certainly can answer any questions that you have about the indicators, fiscal 19 or anything else. Yes, Patty?
Don, I'd like to bring up my new favorite subject, which is solar. Can we see any budgetary offsets with putting up solar panels soon?
Well, solar, as you well know, is something that we're looking at. I've been working with the superintendent on that. We're having an assessment on the school buildings and assessment on our building. At this point in time, they're not included in this. We don't know what we would move forward with. So we're still in that assessment process. But anything that we can do to bring either new revenues in or to hold costs down is something that we should be looking at because it'll have a ripple effect through the next 5 years. So yeah, that is one of the things that we're looking at right now. So we're also looking at, we had a meeting today, we're looking at the Green Communities program. So we're looking, right now we just engaged a consultant to do an energy audit on all of the municipal, including the K-8 school buildings, to come up with a plan to reduce our energy consumption by 20%. So these are things that we're trying to do to constrain expenses. And the beauty of that is you're constraining expenses not in areas that are going to impact education or teaching. You're doing it in areas that hopefully won't have an impact on those services. Does anybody else have any other questions? I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the people immediately to my left again. June Hubbard Ward, the finance director, Jason Little, the town accountant, and Kim Foster, the assistant town administrator. These are the folks that do all the nitty-gritty. I got to give Jason some extra props. All of these charts and tables and the consumer price index, he's meticulous about doing all that work, and I get to present it, but these are the folks that do the background work. And again, everything that we do is a team, and we bring our team to you. You guys are a team, and then we bring that to town meeting, and that's why we're successful.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.